So, hi everyone, xin chào. So I'm Richard Scotney. I manage the global energy efficiency programs at WWF. I'm actually based not too far from Vietnam in Cambodia in Phnom Penh, and regularly go over and join colleagues there. So good to meet you. I want to give an introduction to the Science-Based Targets Initiative. I should caveat of saying that we did and have done some more in-depth training on SBTi in the past, and this is a very quick overview. And I think if there's demand, we can consider kind of the deeper level training, but this is a very quick overview. I imagine we also have some experts on the call, so if there are questions, please do put them in the chat, and maybe I or others can answer them. So I think important, yeah. So I'll give this quick introduction about what is it, some of the concepts, and the standards and the tools. So yeah, I think we're all aware. Many of us are aware that things are getting hotter here in Cambodia. We're really feeling the effects of climate change. And the hottest, this is the hottest June I think that we've had here in Cambodia, and this is happening throughout the world, and then this is having major social, environmental consequences on people. So, and this is mostly driven by the use of fossil fuels, so we need to bring those fossil fuels down. So I think the SBTi is really born of a conviction that that companies have an important role to play in reducing emissions. And this is what we need to do in the future, which is to rapidly reduce our emissions. And so the science says that to reach 1.5 degrees only of temperature increase, we need this rapid decarbonization, and we have an emissions gap. So we're not doing enough. Emissions are not falling at the rate that we would like. So, but we think companies have a role to play, and we hope that companies like your ones can join in this global goal of reducing emissions. What's great about SBTi is really its global nature. So SBTi is a global initiative and a global body that was set up in 2015. That helps companies
giúp cho các công ty mà muốn đóng góp
set ambitious emissions reduction targets in line with the latest climate science. And so the vision is that by many companies having these targets in place, that becomes
mà cái việc đặt mục tiêu này thì trở thành cái việc bình thường, và tất cả các cái doanh nghiệp thì đều có những cái tầm nhìn, những cái mục tiêu để mà giảm cái phát thải của mình phù hợp với cả cái lộ trình hướng đến cái nền kinh tế là không carbon. Thì mục tiêu dựa trên khoa học là cái gì ạ? Thì đây là cái định nghĩa, tức là các cái mục tiêu giảm phát thải thì được xem là dựa trên khoa học nếu như mà phù hợp với những cái gì mà các nhà khoa học nói là cần thiết để mà đạt được cái mục tiêu của thỏa thuận Paris, tức là giới hạn cái gia tăng nhiệt độ toàn cầu ở dưới 2 độ C và lý tưởng là dưới 1,5 độ C. Thì chúng ta có cái quá trình là xác thực mục tiêu, mà bất cứ cái công ty nào nộp cái mục tiêu của mình thì đều là cố gắng để mà thống nhất với cái mục tiêu toàn cầu này, và sẽ phải được phê duyệt qua cái quy trình của SBTi. Thì SBTi đã tăng trưởng rất là nhanh trong vài năm vừa qua.
So now there are over 8,800 companies that have joined the target of the SBTi, with more than 5,500 having set targets. And many of those are actually within a kind of net zero long distance targets, 1,162, and others are kind of near-term targets of the 5,556. So it's a lot of companies, and it's representing an increasingly large amount of global emissions. And it really is growing very quickly. The team has expanded that works on this, and they're increasingly doing more and more validations. So my understanding is that most of the people on this call are from the fashion sector, so from textiles, from apparel, from footwear, based in Vietnam. And I think it's been one of the leading sectors or in the SBTi, mainly I think because of the strong consumer pressure in many countries of people wanting to buy more sustainable fashion. So by my calculations, 278 companies, many, and including, you know, almost what I can see as all the major brands have committed their SBTi targets. 309 further have committed to do so. And you'll see some of those big brands here, but there are really many more. And I'm sure the many brands on this call will have committed to a science-based target as well. Now, we'll talk about the scopes in a little bit, because the emission scopes are very important. But I think for many global brands, what we see in the fashion sector is that almost all of their emissions are from what we call scope 3. So these purchased goods and services. So that is mostly, so for example, H&M, almost all of their emissions don't come from their own operations, but from the many suppliers that they work with in Vietnam, India, and beyond. So, you know, for a fashion brand, their emissions are scope 3. Although if you are a textile, say a fabric producer, then these would be maybe your tier 1 on-site emissions, and we'll get to that shortly. But I think what's important to know is that because these brands are setting science-based targets, that means that there's now an increasing amount of pressure, but in some cases some support to suppliers like yourselves, to factories that are looking to reduce their emissions. So I think, you know, the key part, and I think this has been covered and many of you are aware, is the different scopes. Scope 1 emissions, as many of you will be aware, of those which you're directly producing energy at your site, so an on-site boiler. Scope 2 would be indirect emissions, so particularly the purchase of electricity, or if there's steam coming from a steam provider on an industrial park, that would be scope 2. And then scope 3 is the emissions, you know, from things that you buy. So if you're purchasing fabric, that would be in your scope 3 emissions. Now, this is a very important concept, and I think it's important that all of you on this call kind of take a while when you have time to just get the differences behind of these scopes in place, because it will help you understand how to set your SBTi. So the SBTi has a series of standards and tools, and here are the 3 main validation routes that are available to companies looking to set an SBTi. The first is the near-term target validation. So typically this could be a target within the next 5 or 6 years. So for example, out to 2030, that needs to be in line with a long-term emissions reduction in line with 1.5 degrees. I think we often see 30% or so reductions, but it can be more. The next is a longer-term target of a validation route of setting a long-term target for achieving net zero. And the final one is a quicker process that is available for small and medium enterprises that's available to small and medium enterprises, which is a smoother, less expensive, and less thorough. I would say there's not the strong internal validation check, but a quicker process for those companies that classify as a small and medium enterprise. And I will go through that a little bit now. So the advantage of the small and medium enterprise validation route is that it is small, you know, it is quicker, and it is less expensive. I think the last time we did, I would need to confirm the amount, but it's less. Last time I heard it was less than 2,000 euros to get a streamlined SBTi. My understanding, and this has changed several times in the past, is that you need in the fashion sector to meet 2 of the following 3 criteria. One is have either less than 250 employees, which I think is quite rare in suppliers, but the ones that might matter are turnover of less than 50 million euros and total assets of 25 million euros. So I think many of you could count as a SME. However, I would recommend that you go and check when you do apply for SBTi and which validation route you can check. You check what the latest rules are at the moment, but this is my understanding of the latest classification of an SME. And this allows you to go through a much quicker process for your target. So that's something important to know, that there is this route available that's a little bit more affordable. And it involves basically, you can go online and submit a relatively simple target setting form, and that's explained much more in detail on the site. Now, for those that don't meet the SME criteria, there is a more in-depth and validation process, which includes having a more thorough review of your target. As you can see, here's some details there. And again, this is the validation and the cost. As you'll see, it's quite a bit more expensive. But again, I would suggest you check the site for the latest price. But this gives you an idea of how much it would cost. So again, we have the near-term targets on the left, 5 to 10 years, and the right, or you have the net zero targets, which are out typically to 2050. And as you'll see, for both of those, if you want to get these targets and you're not an SME, you'll have to go through a robust technical review from the SBTi team. I think it's worth noting there used to be very significant bottlenecks on these validations, but they've really built out the team, and these are now much quicker, and the results can be expected in around 30 business days. So there are basically 6 steps. The first is to commit, and then we'll go through the the different steps of SBTi. So the first is the commitment stage. Your company will need to register through the online, and it's through an online form. You need to send a commitment letter that follows a template, and then your commitment will be published on the website. Then developing the SBTi. So once you've committed, it goes up on the site, then it's the working time to think about, right, what is the target that I'm willing to set? Now, those rules are relatively, there's some complex thought that needs to go in, but there are these kind of quite clear guides that people can read, and that will show you how to set those targets. There's also information about the use of offsets, bioenergy, and others in those targets in those documents. What's interesting is that apparel and footwear has its own guidance document that will help you to go through that process. And as we saw, many hundreds of companies have already gone through it, so there is some experience out there. And that experience is represented on the site with FAQs, case studies, and YouTube videos. The next then, once it's developed, is to submit to the SBTi, and that is done through uploading the relevant forms, and that is done on the website. Then what happens is that there's a process once that the form is submitted. You need to then, it will be screened by the SBTi team, and then a contract will be signed. And then once that happens, then there'll be a screening, a desk review, another review meeting, and then final decision will be made. One important part is that is the communication, and that this will be published on the website And there's some guidance of how to communicate, but then you become one of the companies that is publicly communicating their SBT, their science-based target online. And then the final is the one important part is that one commitment that all companies are made is that they need to report on those company-wide emissions and progress against targets on a regular basis. And this must be publicly disclosed. Now, there's no kind of official guidance, but what's important is that these are done somewhere. So the Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP, is one partner of SBTi, and that could be an obvious place where you might share that information. So in closing, I think it's worth noting that there are several Vietnamese firms, I don't know if any of you are here today, that have registered and have successfully made these approved science-based targets. Some of them have gone, most of them have at least got a near-term target, as we see in the left of the second to left column. Some are small and medium enterprises, but some are large and so have been through the full process, and some have set these long-term and net zero targets as well, which is great to see. I guess that's all for me for now.